Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes have clarified their advantage for next season over Red Bull with regard to the testing time they will have, but also a change to the DNA for their car going into next season. But this does not necessarily mean they're going to change the design of their side pods. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to dive into today. Firstly, just to mention this real quick from Amos on Ferrari. So we saw, of course, Charles Leclerc, new power unit for the event back in Austin, came from 12th back to 3rd, helped a fair bit by the safety car, but probably would have finished there regardless. And yeah, of course, Verstappen and Hamilton just ahead of him. Sainz, unfortunately, didn't get to finish the race after the first lap, first corner incident with none other than George Russell. Now, apparently the power unit, of course, like earlier in the season, the PU was having some serious reliability problems, blowing up, it seemed, every other race. There was rumours were they just maxing it out to try and ensure that they could keep up with the Red Bull, and then over time they obviously can't keep up with the Red Bull, and therefore have maybe kind of calmed the engine down a bit to make sure it actually survives the races. Now, of course, they mounted a fresh one in Charles Leclerc's power unit back in Austin, and there's been some rumours that kind of the reliability is getting upgraded. This is the thing about these engines, that it's actually not bad at the moment to have an unreliable engine. Obviously, it's bad, but you can fix the reliability. That the FIA allows you, the regulations allow you to upgrade the reliability. They don't allow you to upgrade the power or anything else. Like the engines are now locked for the next several years until 2026 for the new regulations, but you can still upgrade the reliability. So if you say, yeah, we're upgrading the reliability of this, but it turns out there might be some additional benefits, then of course that's pretty good. But the other part of this is they're kind of fixing the new valves or adding some new valves to the engines, and apparently Sainz is going to get that new power unit in Mexico. So that might be another 10 place or potentially 5 place grid drop we shall see for Sainz in Mexico compared to what Charles Leclerc just had. So yeah, for all the Ferrari drivers, I guess that'll be their 6th engine of the season, which yeah, next season they definitely need to have less than that if they want any chance of competing with the front runners. Let's talk about Mercedes then quickly. I thought this is pretty cool because you guys probably know by now that Hamilton is working on this film directed by Joseph Kosinski, the director of Top Gun Maverick with Formula 1. That's why Brad Pitt was there and all this stuff this past weekend. And Hamilton's actually launched his own production company called Dawn Apollo Films, where like I guess he's going to help with this or whatever, and also is going to do like a documentary on his career. So pretty cool stuff, but yeah, that is upcoming as well. Now, the question is next season, what's going to happen with, can Red Bull be stopped effectively is the question. We saw earlier today the cost cap rumours implying that, Red Bull might get away with it a bit more than some people expected. So look, can Ferrari and Mercedes catch up? Of course, Red Bull are going to be the big favourites next season, and there's been questions about the future dominance, right? Especially because the way the cost cap works, it makes you wonder, a team can't just spend 400 million and then catch up to the front runners. They're all restricted to the same amount. So, how do other teams catch up? There is one way that the regulations now kind of allow lower place teams to catch up to higher place teams, and that's what Toto Wolff is describing here in a second. The other part of the argument, though, is about how the actual car itself is designed, and he reckons that the DNA of the car will change in 2023. So this is the full statement that Toto Wolff just made, saying the DNA of the car will change. However, it doesn't have anything to do with their zero side pod concept. This is kind of the key question still going around about the Mercedes design. Are they going to double down on this year's car and say, you know what, this car is good, but we got one or two things critically wrong with the car that has destroyed the straight line speed and makes it really struggle over kind of lower downforce circuits in general. They've made some upgrades, but it obviously hasn't been enough to catch up to Red Bull in race pace and Ferrari in qualifying pace for sure, apart from very specific circuits where their car is particularly good, and we probably don't have any of those until the end of the season with some of the big straights that are available on every single track from now to the end of the year, Austin in fairness included. He goes on to say the following: I think the DNA of the car is going to change for next year. That is clear. It doesn't necessarily mean that the bodywork is going to look very different, but certainly what is part of the DNA of the car, the architecture, will change it for next year. So interesting what this exactly means, whether this is kind of underfloor stuff on the floor of the car, whether it's towards kind of the rear of the car, where they had an interesting kind of, the way they had to package the engine and the radiators and stuff with those smaller side pods. Like obviously some pretty impressive engineering the way they designed that, but it didn't really seem to help their drag, because that was the theory that, well, at least from my perspective, that smaller side pods equals less drag in a straight line in theory, but reduces airflow to the engine. So, how you counter that out is a bit of a question mark. They haven't really struggled from overheating that much this season, apart from back in Spain and Australia, I think at the start of the year, they did have some issues there. But apart from that, they've been okay. But they obviously don't have the straight line speed, which you'd have thought would have been the case. So that's kind of the question they have to deal with. But he also kind of says here and implies they're not just going to copy Red Bull's design or Ferrari's design. And even Andrew Chauvelin has said, look, if they do that, they're never going to be as good as the original. So they're better off kind of doubling down on their concept and trying to make it the best it can be. Now, he also goes on to say the following, because this is the key point why Mercedes arguably have fallen behind and why they may be able to catch up to Red Bull in the future, given the fact that they are third in the constructors. They were third at the halfway point of the season. They're probably still going to be third at the end of the season. But in 2021, they were winning, of course, which means the teams that are behind them have extra wind tunnel testing time. This is the key way now for teams to theoretically catch up. If you are, there's like a 100% number, which is if you're like a middle team, you get 100% of the allocation. If you're the number one team, you only get 70% of the allocation, and then it's like 77% for second place, 85% for third place or whatever, until the kind of worst team gets like 125, 130% of the wind tunnel testing time, almost double what the front runner team gets, to try and even the playing field to some degree. So Mercedes struggled with this, right, the last year or so, really, because of course, being the number one team, they had 7% less wind tunnel time throughout the last 18 months compared to Red Bull, and then pretty much double that less than Ferrari. Now it's going to be the other way around. They're third place, at least in the halfway point of the season, which I believe is an update point, and then at the end of the year, they may be third place, they may be seconds, but still, they're going to have probably 10 to 15% more wind tunnel testing time than Red Bull will from now until, well, next season, which is a pretty big deal, right? I mean, I think I'll just share a clip for you guys here in a second on Sky Sports where he mentions that, okay, that extra testing time might equate to, 1.5, 2 tenths of a second if they do a good job. And if their car theoretically is on par next season with Red Bull anyway with the changes, then, the Red Bull dominance might not be as long as some people expect it to be. Of course, in addition to the possibility of a further reduction to Red Bull's testing time, given the present rumours about the cost cap implications.
You truly believe you're going to have a car that could be on par with the Red Bull from the start?
Well, we have a certain advantage in terms of wind tunnel time. We had a disadvantage over 1.5 years because we were ahead in the Constructor Championship from January until the end of the year. Then we won it, so we had another 6 months ahead, and now we have 14% more wind tunnel time compared to Red Bull, and that should reel them in a bit.
Can you quantify that? Is that quantifiable in your world in speed? Yeah, in lap time?
We can only quantify it in terms of our own development slope, and that could be a tenth or two, maybe, if we get the job done well.
So what do you think about this from a Mercedes perspective? Okay, they're going to have a DNA change to their car. That was pretty much inevitable anyway. But, do you think this really has the potential to give them an advantage, this extra wind tunnel testing time? I think we should have seen it elsewhere on the grid. And I'm just really hoping that in the coming seasons, we do start to see that play out, right? We know that McLaren and Aston Martin, they're kind of building for the future in some instances. Alpine as well are a team that has pretty high hopes and expectations. And now the fact that all the teams are on the same level in terms of spending, like due to the cost gap, which theoretically should be held to every team, then the teams that are lower down get an advantage in testing time. So theoretically, the grid should even itself out over time. And we certainly need it to happen because the Red Bull dominance this season has been pretty epic from their perspective, right? They just broke the record in Austin of the most ever in Formula One history, top 2 finishes in a row. They've finished either first or second in the last 18 races in a row. That's never happened before in Formula One. And they've won, 16 races of this season or something, which also is pretty incredible. Actually, I think it's only 15 for now, but by the end of the season, we can probably expect at least a couple more, right? So yeah, that's the thing. And also with the fact that Mercedes can't just massively overspend to catch up, they need to rely on these other advantages, which may or may not actually play out here in reality. So it's an interesting question, right? What happens next season with regard to the title fight? Verstappen's going to be the favourite. I'd be surprised if Verstappen doesn't win the title again, to be honest, given the way he's driving right now and the car that Red Bull have built and probably will continue to build. But it would be fantastic if Ferrari can actually put together a good race car that doesn't destroy the tyres, and Mercedes can have a good competitive car up there as well. And theoretically, the wind tunnel testing kind of dichotomy should work in the favour of better composition. But of course, only time will tell whether that actually transpires into reality. Quick statement here on the front wing design. Mercedes, of course, came up with this rather innovative front wing where they had all these kind of lines on the front wing here, which were considered by the FIA to be aerodynamically aerodynamic devices. They're not meant to be used for aerodynamic reasons, and therefore the FIA said, no, you're not allowed to use it, despite agreeing to their proposal when they saw it in the simulator, in the CAD version that I guess they sent to the FIA. Now, the question is whether they'll use it in Mexico, because I believe they stated that to use it in Mexico, they'll have to make a few tweaks to the design. They could do that, and that might be viable, but there's also been some thoughts, okay, is it really worth it? Do they need this new front wing? Is it going to provide that much advantage compared to some other upgrades they made that were successful in Austin? So we'll see. And also the question is, can they ensure they can make these tweaks within the budget cap? Because of course that is a question on everybody's minds as it stands. But very much enjoy your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.